G'day, mate. Luke Ford here. I'm back with Dooovid. It's my first live stream in 3 weeks. I've just taken 3 weeks off from live streaming. Haven't thought about live streaming. Haven't been making notes. Haven't felt a yearning to live stream. But wanted to set up a conversation with Dooovid about a book that I think we both enjoyed. It's called Irony and Outrage: The Polarized Landscape of Rage, Fear, and Laughter in the United States. And I particularly wanted to talk about this with Dooovid because he does not seem to take a great deal of pleasure in humor. And so I thought it'd be fun to break down with Dooovid the particular elements of what makes something funny. And perhaps the shortest definition is that which is funny is a surprising violation of expectations. So, Dooovid, am I right? Do you not tend to be a person who gets much pleasure from humor?
Yeah, generally, I guess I'm considered anti-humor, and I've taken the approach that humor is largely just a sign of bad character, and it was somewhat from my yeshiva education that I went to, we'll call like anti-humoristic rabbis. That it's in the Talmud that there were schools of anti-humor and humor. The Talmud is a story of a rabbi that opened up his sermons with a joke, but also of anti-humors or biblical perspective. I've done a lot of research into humor. I mean, there's the theory of humor, the main school theory of humor, like the disrupted expectation. However, there's also humor, the more negative approaches to humor that that humor is some sort of sublimation of animalistic drives. And so I'm less into politics. I read that book. I skimmed through it twice, kind of sped read, because it wasn't interesting enough for me to deeply read. My mom's a big Jon Stewart fan. Like, she's retired. She watched like Trevor Noah and that type information. And I'd say from my contemporaries, like I said, like definitely humor. And ironically, I'm considered quite funny. Like as a kid, I was almost considered like a comedian, class clown. And yeah, I used to get into teasing matches. In fact, tomorrow night I might go down into Detroit, a new event for chess, which is called Smack Talk, which is kind of like trash talk, mostly African Americans, related to like rap battles, but like the chess, like Elliot's kind of like that. When you play chess, it becomes like a teasing match. And so I've always been considered funny, but I very rarely laugh, and that was a natural dispensation of mine. Even as a child, I almost never laughed.
One of the qualities of humor is that it's essentially a type of riddle. And for people to enjoy humor, they have to be prepared to do some work to engage in play with words. So I take it this is not a type of work that you enjoy doing.
Well, I mean, if I wanted to be arrogant, maybe I could say it's like the tears of the clown. So if I'm high IQ, that the work is actually quite easy to me in the sense that I don't actually like the work I could do more quickly than other people, and I could understand why people think it's funny, and therefore it's not funny to me because I don't have to put that much labor into it.
Okay, and so do you think that she was onto something in her basic thesis that people on the left more enjoy satire, which is poking fun primarily at institutions, and people on the right primarily enjoy humor, that which puts down outgroups?
Yeah, I mean, the book had a lot of interesting conclusions, and I actually on my week in review, I read through your whole synopsis of quotes. It took me maybe even like 30, 45 minutes. I read through your whole uh quotes from the book, and yeah, a lot of her insight is pretty good. Although I think she misses the more basic element of lowbrow humor. So she's focusing on highbrow humor, and I mentioned to you that like the most funny things is lowbrow humor, and it's an audience like my mother who likes this highbrow humor. And I mean, so I don't know if you want to first cover like what is lowbrow humor and why is that the most popular form.
Go ahead. Share your thoughts.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so obviously, like the most popular forms of humor is something called like slapstick, Three Stooges type style, in direct violence. Like I saw, uh, today on the Jewish Israeli papers about God forbid the Hamas terrorists that got killed right after sending out a bomb, or they tried to send out a missile, and then the missile malfunctioned and he got killed, or the slipping on a banana peel, which is essentially, and it's like God forbid, like if you worldstar.com or something like that, the most funny thing in America would like really be like me or you getting beat up. Like God forbid, just theoretically, like if someone played the knockout game on me or you walking down the street and it got clipped on worldstar.com and millions of people watch that, I would guess that like millions of people would think that that's just absolutely hilarious. I mean, right?
I guess. I mean, I don't know.
Because you're a highbrow person, you wouldn't laugh at that, but you think like a picture of me or you getting suffering the knockout game if it was like a dark web clip in someone showed like, oh, here's Dooovid or Luke walking down the street and some guy just out of nowhere like popped him on the side of the head, they would just be laughing hysterically. And it goes to the biblical sense of like the main sense of biblical humor, which might correspond with the expectation is humor is specifically related to the downfall of your foe, and this messianic concept of the last laugh. When Messiah comes or the righteous have the last laugh, because humor is related to the delayed expectation of reward of the righteous and punishment of the wicked, and so it just appears that the righteous aren't being rewarded or the wicked are being rewarded, and when eventually things revert back to the expectation that the wicked person eventually gets their punishment, that's when the righteous person laughs. And in the Bible, that's the most common use of humor, if that makes sense to you.
So, as you go through life, is it an impediment? Is it an advantage, or is it a mix that you're not someone who particularly enjoys humor?
I mean, it's a mix because it makes you abnormal, and people suspect abnormalcy, and I mean, you could look at that positive or negative. It keeps me out of trouble. It keeps me, like, yeah, I am different. I don't find that funny. And it could kind of like, it's like anti-Semitism or something like that, where it's like you're going to be the spoiler in the room. Is like that's not funny. That's just hateful. And to the other people, it's like, oh, okay, don't invite Dooovid next time, or because I haven't put that like the Jew as the designated driver. That generally like it's not cool to be Jewish, because the Jewish role is like kind of like the moral voice. Was like you're not supposed to do that. That's bad behavior. Or talking like Stephen James and Brundlefly about Elon Musk philo-Semitism, is that to some extent like Jews are tattletales, where it's like you can't do that. You can't get away with that. And in the extent that like, well, yeah, I'm going to tell on you because like that's just bad behavior, you shouldn't be able to get away with that. And I'm going to tell you, and if you don't listen, then I'm going to tell on you. And so someone like Elon Musk might be philo-Semitic like that, because like Jews are snitches, and he runs a bunch of businesses, and if someone isn't doing their work properly or misbehaving, he wants a person who's going to snitch on them or report to them. And so humor could somewhat be representative of that. Like you don't have a place with the cool kids, because the cool kids are cool because they engage in um, bad behavior, and if you don't laugh, it's an indication that like you're going to be a tattletale, that you're not down with the bad behavior. So that's like my biblical rabbinic approach to being anti-humor. And I even remember of being yelled at. I had certain very strict rabbis that forbid laughing, and they're like, you laugh one more time, you're out of here. It was just a sign like you're not serious, you're not going to be in the high Talmud class. Like this guy laughs, and like it's just a sign that the person's not serious, he's not cut out for intensive Talmudic study.
So, are there any comics or satirists who you regularly enjoy?
No, I mean, I sell comics. in various things. But no, I mean, generally I'm renounced, and I see that if I enjoy that, I would try to examine that and see it's a source of my bad character. That so like if I did enjoy that, it was like superheroes or comic or Seinfeld, even like you'd say, well, I have to examine and say what's wrong with me that I'm enjoying it. So because I've had that attitude since my um, late teens when I went to Israel and went to yeshiva and came across these ideas, whatever natural inclination towards humor I've purposely weeded out of my personality. So like if you said something and I found it funny, then I would examine myself and say like, well, what character defect is inside of me that I found that funny? And like I learned that among like the Musser school of Judaism in Israel.
Is this part of your overall ascetic approach to life where you tend to be highly suspicious of pleasure and joy in general?
Um, well, if you want to put it in a pejorative, like I would just put it in a typical, I would put it just as my Jewish identity. But obviously, like Jewish identity is disputed, and this concept that there's a struggle between the animalistic nature and the spiritual nature, and humor is a sign of um, the animalistic nature. And so, like, if you're laughing, that's a sign that the animalistic nature is winning. And so, like, I would connect it to my struggle to be righteous and to overcome my baser desires. And also, but I didn't mention like the lowbrow humor into like sex, like obviously. So I said violence and sex. So if you think like most comedians, like when I was a kid, like I actually liked Andrew Dice Clay. I mean, like early, I heard from my brother that was like right when I hit puberty, and something like. But you think like, yeah, like the most funny things from the most popular comics are mostly racism, sex, and violence. So, I mean, when we talk about the book, we're talking about highbrow humor.
But are you somebody who puts a premium or a great deal of importance on joy and happiness?
No, no, not at all. I put almost no premium at all on that. And like even to a negative where I put that almost connected to selfishness, where it's like, well, I just want to be happy is uh, a euphemism for saying I just want to be selfish. In sense, like no, there's duty, and when you say you just want to be happy, it's a way of skirting the fact that you have a duty and obligation and you don't want to fill your duty and obligation, and the reason you don't want to fill your duty and obligation is because you're selfish, you only care about fulfilling your animal desires. And it's say like no, I mean this purely comes from Judaism. I had a natural inclination to why I became Hasidic, but like what I'm telling you now, like this purely comes from my time in yeshiva and hardcore rabbis that openly said this.
Now, you've participated a great deal in live streaming over the past 6 years. Live streaming is a space that tends to be dominated by at least attempts at humor and satire and irony. So, what's your experience with that?
I think a lot of people who like me find me funny, and I do, because I was a chess player, and I knew certain personalities that had this self-deprecating form of humor that I've adopted, where I'll just turn into kind of insult myself, or but yeah, I mean, humor is definitely important to live streaming, and I've kind of accepted kind of the role of a comedian to some places where I'll say things that I know are funny, like on Stephen James. Like for example, I was on this stream with Adam Green and this guy Yehuda Amsalog, this like I guess like Hasbora agent from Toronto, who's a very popular streamer, and like he came on a stream and but like I was joking around with Adam Green and a few of his counter Semites. I was like, "You dumb goy," and like I'll say that, and I know like when I say that, like it's considered pretty funny, and even if there's a few hundred people and like Brundlefly or Stephen James, like they're just cracking up, and like so Stephen James, I was just kind of like bashing him as like you stupid goy, And like to some extent, like I think I'm being serious when I say that, but to the average person listening, it's just humorous. But to the Hasborta, this guy Yuta Amsalog, he just like bounced me and started bashing me. He's like, you can't do that. Like, what you talks like that? Even though he has his own version of humor, but like for him that would be past the acceptable. It's like you're going into anti-Semitic stereotropes of saying like no actual Jew calls goyim dumb goy, so here you are pretending like you're a Jew saying dumb goy, and just increasing anti-Semitism. So I mean, from that level, um, there's the question of is humor bad character, and have I fallen into from streaming danger this e-personality in certain cases of um, bad character playing to the crowd.
Okay. And do you get humor? Humor's always a type of riddle. Do you get it, or do you get it and choose not to enjoy it, or do you miss it?
I think I get humor, and I think I basically just look at it as a sign of bad character or lack of intelligence why people laugh. And so I get why you're laughing, and the reason why you're laughing is because you haven't refined your bad character. And so I mean, which also becomes humorous. So like I used to be on House of Comments with Ralph, and we actually had like tens of hours of these debates on humor, Church of Entropy. And I'm known for arguing against humor, and I've done the research from like Aristotle and I mean, even the word humor itself, like the etymology, it's negative. Humor is considered like the four humors, so you're out of balance. The reason you're laughing is because you're out of balance. So I mean, just the etymology of the word itself implies that you're laughing because something's wrong with you. So I would say like, yeah, I get humor, and I psychoanalyze the person to basically try to understand their character defects by why they find that funny.
So many people have trouble because they're always trying to be funny. I mean, I have trouble because I'm often trying to be funny, and it's particularly annoying for other people who are in a more serious mood. All right. So when you're trying to be funny, you're inviting people to play with you, and usually your superiors at work don't want to play, and a lot of other people who have a great deal of responsibilities don't want to play. But it's essentially a playful invitation. So how do you find people respond to you when you make it clear that you don't want to play in this way?
Um, just disassociation. And some people like, oh, you're so serious. So it's like they're not that serious. I'm that serious. It's like I don't like wasting time, so we just don't associate. Um, I noticed a certain other thing. You probably noticed this also, because a lot of rabbis are like amateur stand-up comedians, especially liberal rabbis and like conservative rabbis, reform rabbis. They'll get up to give a sermon, and it's kind of like a comedy routine, um, because they're not serious people. So if you're uh, from a Haredi approach, you're fire and brimstone. You're like, there is a God, there is punishment, and you will go to hell for that. That is not funny. And I mean, maybe in LA, are there any rabbis like that?
Fire and brimstone? Not that I'm aware of, but generally speaking, the more religious the Jew, the smaller the role that humor plays in his life. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say like in Israel or Brooklyn, like half of rabbis were like that. Not like half of Hasidic rabbis were like that, where just like you're a heretic. There is a God. That's a sin, and you will be punished. End of story. So like in LA, saying people don't really believe that. They don't believe that there's a God and there's you're going to be punished for that. And and therefore like when the rabbi gets up, it turns into like what does it mean that the rabbi is getting up in front of the crowd as a rabbi? Saying the rabbi is a joke, and therefore his sermon's a joke, and he turns it into stand-up comedy. And the reason why it's stand-up comedy because they're talking about cultural things that make the person uncomfortable. So if you look from the pure theological level, uh it's forbidden to fear man because the fear of God should completely overrule all your other fears. So if you fear man, it's a sign that you're a heretic because you should have feared God so much that you don't fear man. And if you're among unserious Jews, they don't really fear God, they fear man. And that's why the humor becomes common. That's why Jews are especially funny, because it's like, you don't really buy this crap, do you, Luke? You don't really believe that Judaism's actually true. And so if the rabbi doesn't believe that Judaism's actually true and he's the one giving the sermon, it becomes a comedy act, and a lot of rabbis embrace that. So like I would say, even I remember liberal rabbis were like 25% of their routine is basically a comedy act, and the congregation's laughing. And I would just sit there and be like, no man, that's not funny. I understand why you think that's funny, but you think it's funny because bad character, because you're not serious. But I wouldn't necessarily say that. Like, I'm saying that to you because we're talking about the subject. I say that occasionally streaming. I've never publicly said it. I've never like spoken up unless someone asked me. So, I'm not sitting here like a party pooper, saying like I'm a libertarian. People have free will to, but uh, that's my understanding. To say it comes straight from Judaism. It comes straight from the rabbis that taught me, and that's why I fell into probably Haredi Judaism, because I had a natural inclination, behavioral pattern that matched Haredi culture that we've talked about in the past.
And you're not a particularly playful person, even outside of humor. Like the whole, ethos of play is not one that I see in your life.
Yeah, so to come to a society where it was just seen as bad character. So generally, I was a nerd, I was unpopular, and then I found Haredi Hasidic popular culture where it fitted my personality, and I became somewhat normal, and or had natural disposition. Rabbis recruited me; they liked me. Within certain yeshivas, I was even from the top students. A lot of big rabbis made me their right hand guy for their assistants. I moved up the rank from the Balchuva yeshivas straight to Ymir yeshiva, going to top classes. A big in I remember in Carlin Stolen, I was there. The this one um, semi relative rabbi from an important family. He said like, this guy's the most serious guy in our synagogue, and that was considered a compliment. Even to the Hasidim, saying like, we're supposed to be serious like you, but we're not. Like, this Balchuba is way more serious than us.
Okay, just a side question. How has the murder of Samantha Woll, a synagogue president in Detroit, how has it affected the Detroit Jewish community?
Yeah, I'm not in the Jewish quarters to know. I mean, I guess it's probably pretty bad, especially considering this person that's been arrested on very flimsy evidence, and then if it does turn out to just be a random black on white crime, a theft gone wrong, and but so basically it's just no longer talked about. And so if Jews are questioning the return of Jews to Detroit or black Jewish relations, if they're just going to accept that it was just a black on uh, a crime that went wrong and ended up in a murder. Uh, but it's a very difficult subject, because if you're a Jew who's going back to Detroit, uh, like, no right wing Jews are going back to Detroit. And so generally, if you're a Jew who's going back to Detroit, you're bullish on black Jewish relations, and you would be thinking like, no, like, it can't be that this is just some random black on uh white crime where a theft went wrong. um but it's almost completely out of the media, no attention at all being given to it. I spoke up and saying I'm skeptical that that this guy is actually guilty of the crime, which it appears that basically they went through all the footage of the street fit footage, and the only guy who was on the street who appears to have been breaking into cars, although ironically he was wearing um, surgical gloves, probably because he was breaking into cars, and didn't want fingerprints or whatever. And all they have is security footage of him, like, I think a quarter of a mile away. They have cell phone data that puts them in the area of her house. And then they did a search warrant and they found a tiny bit of blood on his jacket. And so, yeah, I mean, like, how do you get blood on the jacket? But like the skepticism in Detroit, maybe they planted it and it's just a tiny bit of blood. Maybe he saw her body on the street and he's rejecting it. So the only evidence they have is basically there was a guy breaking into cars that could have been in the area, and then they found blood on his jacket. So they're charging him with the murder. So it's a really bad scenario because he's saying he's innocent. And if that's all the evidence that they have, I think probably a lot of people in Detroit are going to be skeptical. And, so the Jews in Detroit would probably, if they're not skeptical, then they have to be questioning, how are they going to live in a majority African American place where, just even the best of us could just be killed in a random theft. And if you're from the suburbs, then you're looking like, okay, stupid liberal Jew. You thought you could go to Detroit and this wouldn't happen to you, or to be pushing for severe punishment and crime. And it's not going to be a popular issue of the Black Jewish Alliance for the Jewish community to be pushing for this guy to be charged and punished to the fullest extent on weak evidence.
Okay, let me challenge you about some things you were saying earlier. And here's the broader framework for my challenge. And that is, it's worth asking, why do we resonate with particular teachings or with particular texts? And usually it's because it has some resonance with our own life. So there are many teachings in Judaism that emphasize the importance of joy. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, you should serve God with joy. So my challenge to you is that if your life had gone in another direction where your life was more filled with joy, that you would more resonate with the beauties and godliness and holiness of a joyful, happy life. But because your life has been particularly painful, you therefore resonate with those more dour teachings of Judaism that take a skeptical view of joy, laughter, and happiness.
Yeah, I mean, that could be if you want to psychoanalyze me and saying, well, my life wasn't necessarily painful, but in the formative years, where my parents were workaholics and you maybe even question whether they should have had me, or in the sense of they were working and did they want 3 children or could they take care, and then they were workaholics, and they were also under financial stress in my younger years because they had you went to law school and taken out huge amounts of student loans. So it wasn't until I was about 10 or something that my parents had paid off their student loans or gotten. My parents were even in night law school, and then the demographic changed by third grade. Um, whites were a minority, and I got bullied and was in fights regularly, till I went to private school in 10th grade. So, and after 10th grade, my life was not particularly difficult or sad, but those formative years up to 14 years old might have given me these dispositions for life, or maybe they were just genetic, where I always had these dispositions, even from a young kid. But certainly by the time I was uh, hit puberty, I already had these dispositions that have basically been with me my whole life. And then maybe you know, when I became a Hasidic Baal Tshuva, it's like, oh, I found a place for people like me, and then tiered towards the most extreme Hasidic Orthodox Jews, because like then I finally found like, oh, like I'm not wrong, I'm not different. It's them that's wrong. Like I was always right, and it was everybody else who was wrong. And now I found a group or a society that solidified that that understanding that it wasn't me that was wrong, it was the world that was wrong.
How do you understand those Jewish texts that emphasize the holiness of serving God with joy?
Um, well, if it's in the Talmud, there's two schools. So there's in Hasidus. So like in Hasidus, like there was like the two brothers, Rev the Noam Elimelech and the Levi Berditchever, and there was different groups that have different approaches. In the Talmud, it makes very clear that there were different rabbis with different approaches. I forget the names, but the one rabbi who would always come in and ruin the party, and like even at weddings he would come in and remind you like the temple's destroyed, don't be so happy. So within Jewish texts, it's well understood. There's Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and there's different approaches. And I fell into like the Beis Shammai type school approaches. So within that approach, you say, well, yeah, even if you ask them like Beis Shammai, and there's still you're supposed to serve God with happiness, but that would be more not lightheartedness. Happiness doesn't mean lightheartedness. It means accepting your duty, means like some sort of sublimation, understanding of the higher duty. And, so it's not a happiness of being an animal or you're bringing joy to your natural inclination. It's the happiness of some form of enlightenment where you've been enlightened and now understand that, so to say, it's better to be a slave to God than a slave to your passions, and that frivolous people are happy as slaves to their passions, and serving God with happiness means the enlightenment of that you've came to the realization that you should overcome your baser passions and serve God out of duty.
Okay, I'm going to read some excerpts from this terrific book, Irony and Outrage, The Polarized Landscape of Rage, Fear, and Laughter in the United States. It's written by a political scientist at a university, Donna Goldthwait Young. And here she talks about the advantages of using humor, that we use humor and irony to look good to other people, to signal cognitive sophistication, because while not all smart people are funny, all funny people are smart. We use humor to make each other feel good, to make society work more easily, and to tackle difficult subjects without making other people angry. So humor is an advanced form of communication that fulfills social and status needs and gratifications. Being able to successfully use humor is a sign of leadership, authority, and intelligence. It's a way of promoting social cohesion among small groups of people. It allows groups to thrive and work productively together. Humor also creates feelings of happiness called mirth. Feelings often get projected onto the speaker or the person who creates the humor, creating what is known as a halo effect, through which audience members feel good about the person who is making them feel good. Any thoughts here on the advantages of successfully using humor?
Yeah, I could argue with all those points. I'll just mention that I've studied the history of humor and the science of humor, and it's still disputed the origins of humor. But up till about 200-300 years ago, almost all scholars of humor looked at humor as negative, and even the people who used humor were just like, well, it's too difficult to be a good person, and so you have to give people a little bit of break, or humor is like the poor people, or humor for the unrefined. And as I mentioned, even the etymology of the word humor is from the four humors, that your laughter is a sign of being out of balance. So I mean, I could accept this terminology, but I still would tend to interpret it in nefarious ways, and I think it's the biblical understanding of the downfall of your foe, where the expectation is as opposed to some sort of higher level where, well, there's different approaches to life and there's a lot of uncertainty, that you want to think that your approach is the right one and the other approach is the wrong one, and you're on the right side of history, so to say, and eventually justice will be shown, that your opponent will have a downfall. And that's the source of this highbrow. It's basically to resolve your own dissonance. You say, well, uh, a lot of these things are zero sum. You have to choose a path in life. You can't do everything. And once you choose a path in life, you're always going to be wondering, what if I chose otherwise, the other path? And so it's just a natural tendency, rather than just duty, where okay, I chose this path, I'm going to stick with it because I'm a honorable person, even though it's possible that the other path was better. To downplay the other path, and to say, well, my path is the best path, and think that that's really the source of most of the humor in this book.
Okay, let me read a little bit more from this book. Arguments made through jokes elicit less resistance than arguments made through regular serious discourse because of the discounting cue hypothesis. It means that people perceive humor differently from serious discourse and they apply different rules when processing it. So instead of treating it seriously, people see humor as a joke, in which case scrutinizing the message or challenging the speaker about what the speaker is saying is not appropriate. So the cognitive processing required to make sense of even the most basic joke is quite burdensome. So when the meaning of a joke is implicit, and it forces the listeners to add appropriate information from their long-term and short-term memory just to make sense of it, they are spending so much cognitive energy just getting and appreciating a joke. How are they going to have mental energy left over to scrutinize or challenge whatever argument the joke is suggesting? Any thoughts on that, Dooovid?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like there's an animalistic theory of humor because humans are not the only animals that laugh. And so you have like the laughing hyena, I think rats laugh. And um if you're taking the sublimation of animalistic desires, so at the pure base of basic humor is saying, my body is telling me, God forbid, to grape, murder, steal. However, I have a higher function that says you can't do that, you can't get away with it. So, rather than recognizing, like, of course, my body's natural inclination is for these baser urges and they have to be overcome, that humor is like a reminder that you're actually an animal. And so I mention this all the time, and it becomes quite upsetting. And the Talmud kind of clearly says these things and said, like, of course you want to kill your enemy. Of course you want to grape that woman. Of course you want to, steal that stuff that you want that's not yours. And you have some higher moral functioning that prevents you from doing what you naturally desire to do. So most humans, let's say, are not enlightened, that they don't realize that they have a natural urge to do these things. And that's why humor comes out, because really they do want to do these things. And that's why humor is just a purely negative character trait. And it's the animalistic desire. And there's also research in humor that really you're speaking underneath your breath. And they've actually tried to record and like slow down or interpret, but like when someone's laughing, that they're actually trying to speak, and what they're trying to speak is the animalistic basic desires. And that's like, if you take the animals like rats or hyenas, what's funny to them is uh, devouring up and eating another animal alive, and saying, "Well, that's just nothing's funnier than that." And it's saying, "Well, what's the difference when a hyena laughs? A pack of hyena are laughing as they're torturing and eating another live animal." As opposed to human laughter, you're saying that human laughter is this deeper intellectual function. It's not the same thing as a pack of hyenas or rats.
Well, uh, I mean, I think there are many things that we have in common with hyenas and rats, and then there are many things that distinguish us. So we have, higher cognitive processing abilities than hyenas and rats. So yeah, we share things in common with animals, and we also have our own distinctive realm.
Well, because this book, I mean, I agree with the fundamental tenet, but it's saying just to take it to a base, like I'm sure, okay, like God forbid your former expertise, one of the most funniest areas of life is sex, right? Isn't that like the basis of probably like
Yes,
30%
yes,
of
especially
humor?
in my life. Yeah.
And saying, well, why is sex funny? It's because like that really this is what you want to do. Like you could pretend like you're this refined person who has these strict moral standards, but like no, you're an animal and you have these animalistic sexual desires. And it's funny to reveal to people that, like, yeah, of course you want to do this baser human behavior, and that's why people laugh.
Right.
And if
We only
you want to
started to
say,
get jokes about adultery when adultery became more socially acceptable.
yeah, so just to apply, does what she's saying here about highbrow humor apply equally to lowbrow humor?
Well, some of it. I mean, even the most lowbrow humor still takes a little bit of cognitive processing, and there is an effect around a person who provides humor for others, that they're giving other people pleasure and happiness. So it's usually a way of socially advancing oneself.
Yeah, so it becomes the cognitive process, like a Freudian interpretation of like humor, where there's a natural processing as the animal is questioning, like you see an attractive woman and the body says grape, or you see something that's not yours and the body says steal, or the baser functions of violence, and that eventually the child, or through cognitive processes, you learn you can't do that and get away with it, not necessarily because you don't want to. And even the most refined person, um still has the baser animalistic urges, but they've came up with these higher level of cognitive processing. So lowbrow humor just reveals this this change of expectations, and this analysis of what would happen if you did what you really wanted to do. And so that level of like, well, I don't actually think like that, so it's revealed, well, maybe you do actually think like that. And then it's funny to just go through those uh alternatives in your head, versus highbrow humor where you have these very complicated lifestyles of like, are you conservative or are you a liberal, what do you think about these complicated social issues in the culture war. And then a very intelligent person who understands the various perspective is going to be able to play around with your expectations and lead you on one path, and then all of a sudden you're on the other path, and cognitively you're all messed up and you have to do this deep thought of analyzing various scenarios, and it comes out as laughter. And I think like Aristotle calls it like the catharsis, the purpose of theater, where like in the Greek theater where you had humor and everyone would sit down, and the purpose of the humor was to show the downfall of bad character traits. Where on stage, like in Hollywood, till today, you have a person who is portrayed as like the average person or the average better person, and then they have this character flaw, generally shown as some form of hubris, and that character flaw leads to their downfall. And then the person in the crowd recognizes like, well, yeah, I have this bad character trait too, I would like to so it's meant like to teach people what they're allowed and not allowed to do, because I also have that bad character trait. I would probably also in that situation make that same bad decision. However, I know that there would be negative consequences to me if I did that. And so the humor is somewhat like revealing that. And that's what Aristotle calls like the catharsis of humor, where you're laughing at yourself in the sense that you recognize that I don't have that sort of self control. Like, for example, I would commit adultery. Like, it's just that I don't have the opportunity to commit adultery. But had I had the opportunity to commit adultery, I would certainly be weak and I would do it.
Okay, great. So, what have you been doing in last month or so, particularly with your online streaming life?
Um, I've been really covering a lot of research. I mean, to spoil your stream with my like negative take on humor or harping
Okay,
on that,
that's fine.
my interpretation is that like my mom loves John Stewart, and my parents, and I mean, so if you do want to go further into that, like I think I don't have to keep on harping on the lowbrow or negative character, why, especially the liberal or conservative part of why liberals and conservatives find different. But I think it's this complex otherizing where you think that like our way of life is the best way of life, and then these complicated expectations where rather than you're thinking, well, I could have been a conservative or a liberal, but you have to choose one. So I don't know if I spoiled your your fuller review and humor.
No, I've already talked about it on my own, so I just wanted to get a different perspective. But what else have you been streaming about over the past month?
Mostly just reading papers. I'm focusing on the Vienna Circle and metaphysics in the philosophy of science, which is a little bit interesting. Like Kevin McDonald, you focused on the Frankfurt School, and related to the sciences, you could say there maybe the Vienna Circle is just as much or more important than the Frankfurt Circle in terms of how we view science, the downfall of metaphysics, uh, scientific realism, logical empiricism. So I've been reading a lot of papers. Last week I read a paper about Oswald Spengler in the critique of the Vienna Circle. On Wednesday I plan I'm going to go in detail it, and like Kant and Frege and Bertrand Russell. And so also a little bit interesting that a lot of these German rationalists um, are recorded as being anti-Semitic, and looking at their theories to say what was it necessary for their worldview and the rise of mathematical logic that Frege, Russell, Kant were anti-Semitic. I'm not sure. What was Bertrand Russell a big name to you growing up?
Moderate name, yeah, moderately significant. Probably the most prominent atheist up into the 1960s.
And have you heard about his supposed anti-Semitism?
Not that I recall, no.
Yeah, I mean, his wasn't as blatant or major. He wasn't like Frege was actually aligned with the Nazis. Kant opposed allowing Jews to be emancipated into German society. But certain view that it was a little bit interesting by more focusing on you're just trying to understand things and logic. So mostly research related to streaming. I've had a few conversations, people popping on. Pill Eater is around. I guess he's in San Francisco. We spoke a few times. Church of Entropy has came back. I guess maybe her schedule opened up, so she's joined my Sunday Week in Review. I might be on Modern Day Debate with this major Muslim debater who wants to debate against Judaism. I've been speaking. Jenny Simon from Portland. She might have been in your audience for a while, so I've been speaking with her. So yeah, I'm still around speaking to people. I saw that guy Josh Neal just wrote another book on conspiracy theories. Who got doxxed, who was with the McSpencer group and then got doxxed, and he's been back around again. But I saw he just came out with another book on conspiracy theories.
Okay, I'm gonna move on, Dooovid. Good to talk to you, man. Take care.
Okay, yeah, appreciate you inviting me on. And just to mention, you didn't stream for a few weeks. Even a few people asked me, it's like, what happened to Luke? So I said you wasn't sure, but said we'd been in contact. I assumed you were okay, but yeah, I mean, that you hadn't streamed for a while. That even a handful of people, you reached out to me to be what's up with Luke. So
yeah, I took 3 weeks off. I was just doing other things, mainly working, mainly making money, and dealing with the great books. So I kind of checked out from politics, or I just checked out from the creating programs or even blog posts or social media posts. Just I stopped wanting to create anything, and I just I listened to Blood Meridian and Moby Dick, and I've been delving into this great Patreon. It's called Hardcore Literature. So I spent $25 on this guy's Patreon, Benjamin McEvoy, and so I've been getting all his posts on Shakespeare and on Proust and on Tolstoy and Cormac McCarthy, and I've just been learning from him for the past month instead of creating my own content. Okay, good to talk to you, Dooovid. I'll talk to you later, man.
Okay, yeah, take care, Luke.
Okay. Take care, bro. Okay, so while I was largely checked out, I did hear about the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin, and while it sounds like a lot of it was not riveting, I did not listen to it because I'm very rarely interested in what politicians have to say. I noticed that the news media overwhelmingly reacted with derision, and so my reaction to their derision was considerable skepticism. So I was interested in what John Mearsheimer had to say about the Tucker Carlson interview. So let me play some of this.
Watch Tucker Carlson's very, very much anticipated and very much watched interview with President Putin. Were you surprised at all with the history lesson and with the articulation of Putin, with his sound, rational answers to the questions that Tucker Carlson put to him?
I was not surprised at all by the answers, the substance of the answers that Putin gave, especially the sort of last 2/3 of the discussion between the two of them. I mean, most of what Putin said, we've heard before. I was surprised that he went on and on for about a half hour at the beginning, talking about ancient history. It was all more or less beside the point. He could have made his point in a minute or two or three or four. He didn't have to take a half hour to do that. And I think it probably turned some viewers off, and it detracted from his overall performance. So I was surprised by that. I thought Tucker Carlson did an excellent job of trying to end that discourse that was taking place and instead get him to talk about more contemporary issues. But he was not very successful at that. But eventually you got to that. And I thought that Putin demonstrated that he has a terrific command of the facts. He has a clear-cut view of the world and a clear-cut view of what he is doing in Ukraine. You can disagree with that as you see fit. But
right. The news media coverage of Putin is that he's a madman. He's an evil man. He's the second coming of Adolf Hitler. He's mentally ill. And John Mearsheimer has the opposite perspective, essentially that Vladimir Putin is the most competent leader of a major power, I think, in approximately 30 years. And I would side with Mearsheimer's perspective much more than that of the mainstream news media.
I think that he is an impressive individual. I know that's an unpopular thing to say in the West, and that I'll be accused of being Putin's puppet or something like that.
Right. So why on earth would someone say that Putin is an impressive individual? Because he took a Russia that was falling apart and he restored it to the great powers. Like, considering the hand that he was dealt, right, he has done more with the raw material at his disposal to advance the interests of his major power than any other major power leader in the past 30 years.
Like that. But the fact is that, as I said on the show the last time, he is a world historical figure.
Well, you and I, along with a lot of our colleagues, have already been accused by the Ukrainian PR people, or maybe it's their intelligence apparatus, of being Russian propagandists. So they can accuse us of whatever they want, whether there's evidence for it or not. Were you surprised that the media and the establishment here in the West dumped on Tucker Carlson? I agree with your analysis of how Putin came off, and I agree with your analysis of Tucker Carlson. I thought he was courageous, gifted, and quite intelligent in the manner in which he went on this. Yes, of course,
And another reason why I think this story is important is that Tucker Carlson, I think, is very likely to be Donald Trump's vice president nominee. And then if Trump and Carlson win, Tucker Carlson would be next in line to be president of the United States. And I don't think that's far-fetched. I'd say the odds are probably 25% that Tucker Carlson, 30% that Tucker Carlson will become Trump's VP. And then if they win, you know, the odds would probably be about 40% that Tucker Carlson would be the next president of the United States after Donald Trump.
My friend and former colleague, but we haven't spoken in a while. But were you surprised?
And I'm no unabashed Tucker Carlson fan. I think he does some things that are excellent, and he does a lot of things that are just cringeworthy. So he's very much a mixed bag, like Donald Trump himself.
Surprised that Hillary Clinton called him a useful idiot, that the media only dwelt on Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who's now charged with espionage. None of the mainstream media, perhaps out of jealousy that they didn't get the interview, praised him for exposing this to the world as he did, with hundreds of millions of viewers.
What's very interesting to me is that Putin made a number of very important substantive points. And if you look at the mainstream media and the establishment response in the West, nobody focused on the substance. They didn't say that Putin said something that was wrong. For example, I thought it was very interesting that he said, Putin, that in the immediate aftermath of the attack took place in February 2022. Shortly thereafter, when negotiations were taking place in Istanbul, he was asked by the French, and I think someone else, if, as goodwill gesture, he would pull the Russian troops out of the Kyiv area, and hopefully that would facilitate the negotiations in Istanbul. And he did that. And many people thought that he did that at the time because he was losing the war or the fight in the Kyiv area. But he said, no, it was a gesture of goodwill. And I was asked by the French and someone else to do this. If that's true, that's, I think, an important piece of information. And nobody refuted it. So as far as I'm concerned, what Putin said was true, unless, you know, somebody can show that it's not true. But he was making a substantial number of other points on important issues. And you would think that the Western media and the Western foreign policy establishment would contest him on the issues. But no, that's not what happened. In fact, what they did was they smeared Putin and they smeared Tucker Carlson. And this is just the way things work in the West. If you don't agree with somebody and you can't defeat that somebody on the basis of facts, what you do is smear the person.
Right. Chris, let's run the clip where Tucker Carlson asks President Putin if he would ever invade Poland under any circumstances. And then Professor Mearsheimer, it segues into what Boris Johnson did to the agreement in Turkey. You'll see President Putin going like this, showing his fingers about an inch to an inch and a quarter apart, showing the size and depth of detail that was in the agreement, much of which was initialed and signed by the chief Ukrainian negotiator. Watch this.
Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat-mongering.
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think that I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature and then he himself said, "We were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance."
Boris Johnson, of course, was outraged at that statement, but that's been reported many, many times, and here it is out of the horse's mouth. And this is exactly what you said about pulling the troops out of Kyiv so as to facilitate the negotiations in Turkey until the West interceded.
That's correct. I mean, the first set of comments about Poland make perfect sense. I mean, the conventional wisdom in the West is we better start preparing for World War III, because after he conquers all of Ukraine, he's going to conquer countries in Eastern Europe, and then he's going to threaten Western Europe, and this is going to lead to World War III. This, of course, is nonsense. He's never expressed any interest in conquering all of Ukraine, much less conquering countries in Eastern Europe, to include Poland, and that was reflected in his comments. I just don't understand why people continue to make that argument that he is interested in conquering countries like Poland and conquering all of Ukraine. And in fact, just to go back to Istanbul, that deal that they were about to cut did not involve Ukraine surrendering its sovereignty to Russia.
You know, I want to go on to Israel and Gaza, but I have to make you laugh a little bit by running a former Republican presidential nominee and still senior senator from Utah, Mitt Romney, making absurd arguments, cut number 8, Chris, on the floor of the Senate. This is the opposite of what you just said. Watch this.
If we fail to help Ukraine, Putin will invade a NATO nation. He may delay his next invasion until he rebuilds his decimated military. But we must be clear-eyed. Ukraine is not the end, it is a step. If we fail to help Ukraine, China will eventually absorb Taiwan. If we fail to help Ukraine, NATO, the alliance has prevented great power conflict for over 75 years, will falter and eventually disintegrate.
This is the nonsense that the Senate apparently accepts when it votes overwhelmingly. I think it was like 75 to 25, more or less those numbers, in favor of this aid package.
Yeah, I mean, this is the conventional wisdom, not just in the Senate, but in the foreign policy establishment.
Right.
The problem that these folks face is there's just no evidence to support that. Where is the evidence that Putin is interested in conquering all of Ukraine? And where is the evidence that he's interested in conquering countries in Eastern Europe? And what do they have to say about the fact that Putin was willing, as a goodwill gesture, to pull forces out of the Kyiv area in March of 2022? What does he say to that? I mean, this is the substance. This is what we should be talking about. But again, we don't talk about substance.
Right.
We engage in smearing.
I want to switch gears for a minute because of relatively recent development.
Okay, so 2 weeks ago, the special prosecutor investigating Joe Biden's mishandling of documents came out and said you can't really charge Joe Biden with committing a crime because he's got a terrible memory, and he's just essentially not mentally competent enough to deliberately commit a crime. Let's get how it goes.
It's pretty obvious that President Biden doesn't like going on television, that his inner circle shields him from the press. But suddenly, Biden was attacking Donald Trump in a televised speech from the White House. And here's one reason. The president wanted to change the subject from his memory issues in the wake of that stinging special counsel's report saying he has difficulty remembering things. Also, Biden finally seems to be taking the advice of those who say he has to prove his competence by going on the air rather than trotting out aides who say how sharp he is in private. Trump gave his opponent an opening with these South Carolina rally remarks, recounting what he told a NATO leader about the failure to spend what's required on defense if Russia attacked.
I said, "You didn't pay? You're delinquent?" He said, "Yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want."
So a large part of the reason that Donald Trump has the support he has is that he just blurts out whatever he's thinking. So, yeah, you can make a good case that Donald Trump is a serial liar, but he is at the same time more transparent than any other major politician of which I'm aware in American history.
And that prompted this Biden address.
No other president in our history has ever bowed down to a Russian dictator. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I never will. For God's sake, it's dumb, it's shameful, it's dangerous, it's un-American.
To which Trump posted, "Could somebody please inform our uninformable president that NATO has to pay their bills? They are right now paying a small fraction of what we are for the disaster in Ukraine." the world got a stark and tragic reminder of Vladimir Putin's murderous tactics in his invasion of Ukraine, with the death in an Arctic prison camp of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, with much of the media and Western leaders blaming Putin for the courageous dissident's demise.
Well, this is a dissident who chose to go back to Russia knowing that this is what awaited him. If Putin deliberately murdered this guy, why didn't he do it years ago? This guy's been in custody for years, and who knows what other health problems he has. But yeah, I don't think Putin's a liberal. You know, I don't think he's particularly concerned about the human rights of the opposition leader.
Meanwhile, the press also reporting that Biden's lawyers unsuccessfully pushed the Justice Department to remove from special counsel Robert Hur's report the findings about memory issues, bringing the president back to the very subject he wants to leave behind. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
Okay, so Tucker Carlson is somehow getting blamed for the death of this dissident in Russia, which seems absurd. Here's Tucker Carlson's response.
I'll use the devil's advocate.
But advocate away.
Yes. Okay, I'll tell you. You should challenge in the rules of an interview, and you're a master in your business. It's not for me to give you a lecture about that.
Let's say hello to Colin Liddell. Colin, how's it going, mate? Colin, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, Colin, how's it going?
Yeah, fine. How are you, Luke? You've been absent for a while, haven't you?
Yeah, just took a few weeks off to do other things with my life. I think it's good to check out. What's the longest that you've gone without making public commentary?
It's hard to say, really. Usually I put something out every few days. Of course, doing a show is a bigger commitment. I just post something that's quite easy to do. It's not too labor intensive. I don't have to use too much energy. I just have to have an idea and something to say.
Did you pay any attention to the Tucker Carlson interview of Vladimir Putin or any of the press coverage of it?
Oh yeah, I kind of waited up for days, waiting for that to happen. I was so excited.
Do you have any thoughts?
I wanted to learn more about 9th century Russian history, and I wasn't disappointed, honestly. So I got the full story. Finally, Rurik and Oleg and all those great names from the past got their due.
And anything going on in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I mean, that's catching your attention? We seem to getting an overwhelming consensus that things are not going in Ukraine's favor the last few months.
Oh no, I totally disagree. I think things are going in Ukraine's favor. This attempt by the Russians to kind of sabotage the West, which is underway in America, is slowly but surely being defeated. America's going to stump up a lot of extra funding. The kind of delay in American support has actually prompted the Europeans to throw a lot more into the ring as well, I feel. So I think, the overwhelming power of the West is slowly being mobilized against Russia. Putin's really stretching himself very, very thin at the moment. Fiscally, financially, Russia is on the ropes. And so I think, something will probably happen this year.
Meaning what?
Meaning, Russia will collapse at some point. I don't. I just think that the Ukrainians are getting more and more top-notch weaponry, and the Russians are going to have real problems with their economy this year. Everything seems to be kind of hanging upon Putin having this fake election in March and being reappointed as the leader of Russia, and then hoping that Trump can cause enough trouble in America. And I don't think that's going to play out. I think Trump's he's sort of coming apart at the seams. He's been hit with these massive lawfare suits, and maybe they are a bit unfair and all that, but this is kind of karma for this guy, because this is somebody who's has a long record of cheating, defrauding, and kind of not paying his bills. And so if they can take him down with lawfare, then it's a little bit dirty, but so what? And I think this will affect his donor base. I mean, can anybody donating money to Trump? Basically, you're not donating money to Trump and his election and his campaigning. You're donating money to his legal bills, and this bottomless pit of kind of legal liabilities that's opening up below him. So I think that's going to take a lot of the wind out of his wings. And also the way he's reacting is not too good. He's becoming more and more of a kind of unhinged personality, ranting on about how unfairly he's being treated. And maybe there's a little bit of truth in that, but that's not really what people want to hear. And then he's saying increasingly stupid things about the war in the Ukraine and about NATO, and sort of pissing on NATO. That's not really a good look. And then this is against the backdrop of somebody like Navalny being sort of treated in a very, very kind of harmful way, that either he was murdered or he was just brutalized to the point where he kind of gave up the ghost.
Is there a wider significance to people in the West for Navalny's death?
Well, I mean, it's not teaching us anything new, but I mean, this is a guy who's quite charismatic. I think it'll have a big impact on a lot of Russians as well. You see, this is probably more important, because I think Navalny was somebody who really resonated with the younger generation in upper class younger Russians in places like St. Petersburg and Moscow. And so for Putin to sort of take him out, or to allow him to die in this way, is a bad move. This is going to really kind of, Putin's got to play to lots of different audiences, and one of the key audiences he has to play to are these sort of depoliticized younger Russians in the metropolitan areas. And what's happened to Navalny, whether it was a murder or just the accumulation of mistreatment, that's going to be a bit of a curveball for Putin, I should imagine, especially with the election coming up. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot of people behind Putin, on the team Putin, who'll be thinking like, Putin, he's sort of kind of outlived his usefulness. He's made his big play. It hasn't really worked out well. He's starting to make us a bit toxic. People are not going to talk to us. They're not going to do a deal with us. Putin's stimulating opposition to us. When other countries see a Russia headed by Putin, it sort of aggravates them and mobilizes them against Russia. So I think the people at the top in Russia who are, sort of on team Putin, but in the shadows behind the guy, they're going to be thinking, yeah, this guy, it's not going to work out. It's time to make a change of management. So I think there'll be a few people thinking along those lines, and those people will have the ways and means to remove Putin. And of course, if Putin is taken down, that's going to create a lot of instability as well. So, it could be a very interesting year in Russia. And, it could be very dicey all round, of course, if Russia descends into chaos. And this is the reason why, for example, the Biden administration has been trying to kind of slowly, gradually help Ukraine to kind of eke out a victory, rather than sort of like pumping in all the necessary assistance and the weapons they required. So the Biden administration has been very, very timid and sort of half-hearted in its support of Ukraine. But the way things are going, they're going to keep supporting Ukraine until Putin is defeated in some way, whatever form that takes. We'll see.
Why do you think the dissident right is so hostile to Ukraine, as embodied perhaps in the commentary of the late lamented Coach Red Pill?
Well, I'm not going to talk about that irrelevant, rather pathetic character, but The dissident right in general, it is to a large degree a creation of the Russians. I mean, the Russians are the for years, for decades, the Russians have been sort of boosting all these kind of weird memes and fake news and kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and so on. And this has all been channeled through the dissident right. And I mean, anybody like you or me who have been in the dissident right for ages can see how this is all played out. We've seen all these things go around and come around, and it's just been pretty obvious that the Russians have had a very heavy hand in what the alt-right has done, how it's evolved, and what it became. And it's had a very negative influence, because I think there is a legitimate radical critique of Western society, and that's really what I was interested in when I was subsumed into the dissident right. I was interested in this legitimate criticism of Western society, but that was then sort of co-opted and weaponized to be used against the West, and to spread toxic memes, and to stir up various forms of conflict and polarization and confusion in the West.
What are specific examples of Russian promotion or creation of the dissident right?
Well, I think Andrew Anglin is obviously linked to Russia. I think the TRS cluster, they're obviously linked to Russia through Bausman, who is now in Russia itself. So there are lots of cases. Subscribestar was also founded by somebody with connections to Russia. So if you dig down into it, and if you look at some of the things I've uncovered on my website and on my Who's Who in the Dissident Right, you'll see that there are lots of there are lots of items of hard evidence of Russia co-opting and distorting the dissident right. And you can see that they've also had an enormous influence on some very big and important people. It's quite obvious that Elon Musk is he's in the Putin camp. And your friend John Mearsheimer, this guy who used to be some sort of semi-respected academic, he's a blatant Putin shill. Almost everything that comes out of his mouth, it just sounds like pure shillery to me.
And I may be asking you to repeat yourself. What does Russia get out of promoting the dissident right in the West?
Well, quite a lot. I mean, look at basically Russia has to fight dirty. They have an economy which before the war was about the size of Italy's, and then they're up against America and the rest of the West. Militarily, they can't really cope, except they have some advantages, like their readiness to sacrifice large numbers of people and so on. But militarily, in the age of modern technological warfare, Russia has to find a cheap, asymmetric way to cause confusion in the West. And the Western societies, especially in the past, to a lesser degree now, were much more open. And it was the only feasible way that Russia could go toe-to-toe with the West was to use various kinds of Kremlin ops to destabilize and polarize Western societies. And so I think this is what they've been doing, and especially since 2014. In 2014, they really ramped up. Before 2014, they were also doing it, and so of course it makes if they can get Western people fighting about all sorts of cultural warfare issues, then that takes the West's eye off the ball, so to speak. There's all sorts of benefits to Russia to kind of stir up the shit with the dissident right. What they've done to the Republican Party, I mean, the Republican Party used to be the main sort of hawkish party in the United States. And by playing on this kind of underbed of ideas of America Firstism, they've managed to almost take over the Republican Party. Because I mean, basically, Trump is he is pushing their agenda, and this is now almost the dominant agenda in the Republican Party, at least while Trump still has his power.
How significant is Putin's leadership as opposed to any other likely leader of Russia, particularly when it comes to Western interests?
What do you mean by that?
Well, let's say Vladimir Putin dropped dead tonight. How would that affect Western interests, Ukrainian interests, German interests, Polish interests, American interests, if there was a different leader of Russia? Is Putin a singular threat, or is he just a representative of basic Russian interests?
I'd say the latter. I mean, it's not like Putin is this unique sort of Hitlerian figure. I think if you took down Putin, you'd still have the problem of Russia to deal with. But it would be an easier problem to deal with, because right now Russia has to take a loss. That's the logic of the situation. Russia was hoping for a swift and easy and relatively painless victory in Ukraine. And right now, I think the number of Russian casualties killed and wounded is somewhere in the region of 400,000. So, and they've completely fucked up their economy, and they've moved to almost North Korean style of economic system to keep going. So Russia's pushing itself to the point of collapse, and they're going to reach that point of collapse if Putin is at the helm. But if Putin was removed, you could have a new guy who would obviously be part of the Russian deep state in the same way that Putin was, but you'd have a new guy who didn't have a tarnished reputation when it came to doing deals. It would be, okay, this is a new guy. They've revalued the Kremlin ruble here. Maybe we can do a deal with this guy. Maybe this guy will keep his deals. So the trouble with Putin is his credit as a deal maker is shot to shit. So this is the reason why people within the Russian administration, within the Russian deep state, will be thinking like, maybe it's time to make a move and get the knives out.
Is Russia a serious threat to Poland, to the Baltic states?
Well, I think if they succeed in driving America into a kind of isolationist mindset, then you've got all these European countries that don't always see eye to eye. They'll have to come up with a solution, a security solution that can keep Russia at bay. It's not really clear what that would look like. It'd probably mean a nuclear Germany, and then you'd have another problem, which would be the sort of inherent dominance of Europe by Germany. So I don't know. These old historical patterns, they go away, but they kind of tend to sort of come back in all sorts of interesting ways.
And is a strong NATO in America's interests? Is Trump just totally out to lunch with his frequent anti-NATO sentiments?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, right now, we've had an imperfect global system which has avoided major wars around the world, and that's generally been quite a good thing, I would say. If you remove the international system, then you have strong regional powers throwing their weight around, and that's going to lead to all sorts of breakdowns in law and order around the world, all sorts of conflicts and chaos, all sorts of disruption to the flow of trade and the economic well-being of the world. And of course, it'd be very, very interesting. But I think most people would instinctively be against that because it would probably hit their lifestyles extremely hard.
And do you think Donald Trump stands a good chance, say better than 40%, of becoming the next president of the United States?
No, I don't think so. I think his chances are probably more around less than 20%, I would say. To be as realistic without being too harsh, or I would say that they're probably even less than that. But it's always very difficult to predict the future. The future is murky by its very nature. But I would say he has a diminishing chance of becoming president. I think he's not going to appeal to a lot of people. He won't have he won't have the funding. Most of his funding is being ripped away by these lawfare attacks. This is going to scare off a lot of his donors. The Biden campaign, the Democrats, they'll have a lot of money in the can. They'll be able to attack Trump quite successfully. Trump's he has a lot of weak points now. And, they both, I mean, basically Biden looks a bit old and doddery, but, so does Trump. Trump looks old and a bit kind of half crazed, which is even worse. So I think when the election when it comes down to a head to head between Biden and Trump, if it does come down to a head-to-head between Biden and Trump, I think most people are going to make the safe choice and go with Biden again. Biden looks like a safe pair of hands. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't fly off the handle. He doesn't do some sort of crazy, unexpected shit. He seems to make his moves quite carefully. So I think that will appeal to a lot of voters.
What's your perspective on Tucker Carlson, and has it changed over time?
Well, I never really realized how stupid he was before, because I mean, basically, I used to hear Tucker, going on about American politics, which is a bit stupid in itself, and so he sounded like he had a few good takes, on American politics some years ago, and then it became more and more obvious that he was. This was before he was fired by Fox. It became more and more obvious that he was just trying to kind of bait the boomers and get all these boomers agitated so that they'd watch his show on Fox, and it started to become increasingly cringe at that time. And then he started to delve into these conspiracy theories, and then it was only a matter of time before Fox fired him. I started to think at the time, and then we found out that he cost them about $700 million. So he became at that point a bit of an oddball, fringe character. And then he started to push these ridiculous Russia Putin narratives. And so, then he actually went to Russia. And then you kind of saw, oh, okay, this is a guy who's now out of his depth, who doesn't understand what a fucking shopping trolley is, who doesn't understand the exchange rate between the ruble and the dollar, and really basic stuff. This guy was actually walking around Russia looking like an idiot, and maybe he's just playing to his idiotic audience, because his audience is actually as stupid as that. So maybe he's actually intelligent enough to know how a shopping trolley works. Maybe he's intelligent enough to know the basic economics involved in Russian supermarkets. So either he's stupid or his audience is incredibly stupid, and he's just like playing to that. So those are the two possibilities that spring to mind there. And if he's stupid and honest, then he's just like a kind of, okay, he's a stupid guy, but he's sincere, so he's not too bad. But if he's playing to his incredibly stupid audience and reinforcing their incredible stupidity and doing that in a cynical way to kind of generate views, and to subvert American society, then he's a real, POS. He's somebody that really deserves a Novichok sandwich, in my opinion.
What's a Novichok sandwich?
That's that, interest in chemical commensable that Putin likes to feed to his ex-friends and challengers.
What do you think of the chances that Tucker Carlson becomes Trump's vice president?
No, I don't know. Well, it's not impossible. Trump could go there, but I don't think it would work, because in a way, Tucker's too much like Trump, and so he doesn't do anything to balance the ticket. He just reinforces the brand crazy.
Now, do you perceive right-wing discourse, right-wing punditry as significantly lower IQ generally than mainstream and left-wing commentary?
Now definitely, yeah. What we're seeing on the right wing is honestly, it's embarrassing. It is very, very embarrassing. And anybody who's intelligent or who has a wish to kind of critique society is going to be kind of repelled by it. So, the right wing, by being weaponized for cheap shillery and polarization ops, has become a extremely cringe joke. So it's no wonder that anybody with any intelligence has left the dissident right, and it's increasingly looking like a freak show and a circus.
Do you have any thoughts on this guy who used to be known as Frame Game Radio, aka Mike Benz?
Yeah, well, he's somebody who believes that race is not immutable. That's what I know about him. He thinks that also he believes that gender is not immutable as well. He thinks that a male can be a female can be a male, a black man can be a white man can be a black man, and it all doesn't really matter. That's what he basically believes. Going by his, I was listening to a recently I was listening to a conversation he did with Richard Spencer. I think it was in 2018, which was on the Brundlefly cast. And basically that was his position. Maybe it's not his sincere position, because the other thing we know about Frame Game is he's not really a sincere personality. He's somebody who's playing a false game.
How serious is dissident right support for the Palestinians?
Well, they any way to kind of hate on the Jews, really, So the only thing that makes any difference between their attitude to the Palestinian conflict and their attitude to what's going on in the Sudan or Yemen or some other shithole country is that the Palestinians are, up against the Red Sea pedestrians. So that's the only thing that they really care about, a lot of them now.
Right. And what's
anyway, Luke, I've got to go now.
Thanks,
so,
man. Thanks for
just
stopping
thought I'd check in and give the show a little bit of support, so you don't go away for another 3 weeks.
Thanks, Colin. Great to talk to you, man.
Okay, cheers, bye.
Cheers, bye. Okay, let me play this clip.
I'll use the devil's advocate.
But advocate away.
Yes, okay, I'll tell you. You should challenge in the rules of an interview, and you're a master in your business. It's not for me to give you a lecture about that, but you should challenge some ideas. For instance, you didn't talk about freedom of speech in Russia. You did not talk about Navalny, about assassinations, about the restrictions on opposition in the coming elections.
I didn't talk about the things that every other American media outlet talks about
Why?
exclusively.
Yes, this is
because
my
those are
question.
covered, and because I have spent my life talking to people who run countries in various countries and have concluded the following, that every leader kills people, including my leader. Every leader kills people. Some kill more than others. Leadership requires killing people, sorry. That's why I would want to be a leader. That press restriction is universal in the United States. I know because I've lived it. Ask my former, I've had a lot of jobs. And I've done this for 34 years, and I know how it works. And there's more censorship in Russia than there is in the United States, but there's a great deal in the United States. And so, at a certain point, it's like people can decide whether they think, what countries they think are better, what systems they think are better. I just want to know what he thinks. That was the whole point.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin's not a liberal. And so judging him by the liberal hero system is perhaps inevitable in the West, where we are very much influenced by liberalism. But it's also perhaps creating a genre error, right? Putin rules, according to a Russian authoritarian perspective that's been the dominant political perspective in Russia for hundreds of years, all right, hundreds of years prior to communism.
International politics trumps international economics when the two are in conflict. My third point, I want to be very clear. I am not making the argument that great power wars are likely. That's not my argument. My argument is that great power war sits in the background most of the time, and great power war, nevertheless, has a profound influence on how states behave. And the reason that great power war is not likely dovetails with another point that I made to you folks, and that is that war is so destructive. War is so horrible. The fact that it is so destructive, the fact that it is so horrible, makes it very difficult to get states to initiate it, right? And what drives that, its destructiveness, is nationalism, industrialization, and the nuclear revolution, or nuclear weapons, right? Nationalism makes wars very destructive, right? Because you're able to create mass armies, and you're able to motivate those armies to hate the other, a lot of otherness at the core of nationalism. So nationalism makes wars highly destructive. Industrialization, all these weapons that are designed to kill people, running around out on the modern battlefield with all these weapons that are highly sophisticated and maximize the chances they're going to kill you. Whoa, right? So very industrialization, and then of course nuclear weapons. Right? Nuclear weapons, they're called weapons of mass destruction for a very good reason. So nationalism, industrialization, and nuclear weapons make war incredibly destructive, and that makes war less likely. You understand the point? It makes it less likely, but nevertheless, it makes it as important as ever because it sits in the background. It's still a possibility. That's the basic argument that I am making to you. Okay, let me shift gears now and talk about the decision to go to war. Okay, my second theme. You remember when the Ukraine war started, February 24th, 2022. The Russians clearly invaded Ukraine. The basic argument is that this war was both unjust and illegal. There's just no question that almost everybody thought that the war was wrong. The initiation of the war was wrong and should.
Right. I've done, pretty horrible things in my life. And I don't advocate them, and I wish I had made different choices. On the other hand, they were part of a trajectory that advanced my life or that enabled my life to survive. I'm thinking about when I was essentially bedridden in my 20s and living at home with my parents in Newcastle, California, in an isolated part of Northern California, bedridden, isolated, lonely, couldn't figure out, what was going on with my health. And I had this growing fear as the years rolled by that at my current trajectory, I would not be able to escape what was holding me back. And so I developed the sense that there was solutions for my problems that were out there. I just needed to find a way to connect with people. And I thought the easiest way for me to form a strong enough connection with people is to find, a woman who loves me. And then she will be motivated enough to find solutions to my debilitating health problems. So I started placing and answering a ton of singles ads, and a steady stream of women came up to visit me. I started going to bed with them. So I went from being Shomer Negia, which is traditional posture of Orthodox Jews where they don't touch the opposite sex outside of family members to very deeply touching, whole stream of women who came to visit me. And I did form various relationships. I moved to Florida with one woman, in large part because she seemed to have a great psychiatrist. And I wanted to go see her psychiatrist. And all this sex and all this promiscuity and all this opportunism and using of women that I manifested, it did get a solution to my chronic illness. All right. I did find a great psychiatrist, my girlfriend's great psychiatrist, the late Daniel Goldwyn in Orlando, Florida. He did get me on a medication that restored me to 2/3 of a normal life. And so obviously I wish I hadn't acted in unethical and exploitive fashion, but it did enable my survival. And when your survival is at stake, right, people will break moral rules, and nation states will break moral rules when they feel like their survival is at stake.
Condemned. Now, why is that the case? It's because of the domination of a non-Clausewitzian view, which says that international law and just war theory should dictate when states can go to war. And I believe that almost all of you believe this, and I believe that almost everybody who's reasonably well educated and
Right. So if you are a religious Christian or a religious Jew, you believe that religious considerations should shape and dominate your decisions about who to go to bed with. That is the ideal, but frequently people don't behave according to their ideals, right? Very few Orthodox Jews, for example, are fully observant of Jewish law.
has thought about this in the West believes that there are limited times when you can go to war, or limited circumstances when you can go to war. And those three circumstances, and this is an argument based on just war theory and international law, is you can initiate a war if you have good evidence that the other side is about to attack you. This is called a preemptive attack, right? Mike is about to attack me. I can see that he has loaded up the shotgun. He's coming after me, and I just get in the first blow. So he's really initiating.
So this is one reason why I think happiness and forming an internal sense of security and living a life of joy is so important, because you're much more likely to feel like your survival is at stake when you're miserable, when your life isn't working, when you are in financially, socially, psychologically desperate situation, right? You will then feel much more ethical latitude in how you behave. For years, I remember I would confide to my psychotherapist, I'm just in survival mode. I mean, that's largely how I lived between, 1993 and say 2016. And feeling like I was living in survival mode, that gave me, latitude to do almost anything that I thought I needed to do to survive, including a lot of things that now make me feel ashamed.
In the war, even though I get in the first blow. That's a preemptive strike. That's okay according to just war theory. That's okay according to international law, on most accounts of just war theory. Second is if we get a UN Security Council resolution. I'm unhappy with what Mike is doing. I go to the UN Security Council. I get approval from the UN Security Council. Then I am justified in attacking Mike. Makes perfect sense. Fits neatly with international law. So the first case is a preemptive strike. Second case is a UN Security Council resolution. And the third is that you're allowed to initiate a war, intervene, strike into a country if it's engaging in mass murder or genocide. Right? This is the idea. If you see what's happening in Rwanda and you decide you're just going to send in the 82nd Airborne, you can do that. Right? You're acting according to just war theory. This makes perfect sense to all of you. The two cases, which I've already mentioned before in my setup remarks, where you're not allowed to initiate a war, are number one, a preventive war. This is not preemptive. Remember I talked about preemptive is where Mike's going to attack me and I beat him to the punch. That's preemptive. That's okay. A preventive war is where I see Mike is growing more and more powerful and I want to cut him off at the legs before he becomes too powerful. That's a preventive war, right? The second is a war of opportunity. This is a war where, Mike and I are competitors, and I'm thinking about attacking that person over there as a way of gaining more power so that I improve my position relative to Mike. That's a war of opportunity. It's an opportunity to acquire more power, right? Those are verboten. Preventive war, wars of opportunity. They're verboten according to just war theory and according to international law. Now let's just go back to Ukraine. The conventional wisdom in the body politic in the West is that Putin invaded because he was an imperialist. He was interested in gaining more power for Russia, creating a greater Russia, right? It was a war of opportunity. The vast majority of people in the West believed that it was a war of opportunity, right? He was trying to gain more power for Russia, make Russia more powerful, make it a greater Russia, right? That was the argument. That's verboten, and that's why everybody criticized him. I argued, on the other hand, and now a number of others like Jens Stoltenberg, who is the head of NATO, have argued this, that it was a preventive war. My argument is it was a preventive war. He was not going to let Ukraine become part of NATO. He was going to prevent that from happening. So there's, let's call it the John Jens Stoltenberg argument, right? And then there's the conventional wisdom. Both arguments are ruled out of court according to just war theory and international law, right? Neither is acceptable, right? Both are very Clausewitzian arguments, right? So if you think about what's going on here, right? With this non-Clausewitzian argument, remember, Clausewitz doesn't talk about whether anything is morally justified or whether it violates international law. It's a tool of statecraft. Clausewitz says if John sees an opportunity, right, to protect himself in the face of this threat from Mike, or Mike sees a threat to protect himself in the face of a threat from John, Mike and John can do whatever they want. War is it's a tool of statecraft. Let's not get wrapped around the axle about ethics and morals or anything like that. That's the Clausewitzian view. And what you want to understand is that the view that almost all of you, I'm sure, have accepted, right, and the vast majority in the body politic have accepted, is a non-Clausewitzian view. And what's going on here is that we are basically trying to subordinate the conduct of international politics to a moral or legal order. You want to think about what's going on. This is very important. Nobody really puts it in these terms. We are subordinating the conduct of international politics to a set of moral and legal precepts. Right? It's really a radical way of thinking about the initiation of war, right? And it's fundamentally non-Clausewitzian, right? And the example I like to use to highlight this is the case of Michael Walzer's famous book on just war theory. I think it's a terrific book. I've used it for years for teaching purposes, even though I'm a realist. And the book is an attack on realism from the get-go. If my memory is correct, the first chapter is against realism. That's the title of the chapter. He hates realism, right? And he would hate what I have said to you over the past 10 minutes. And it's a defense of just war theory. And it's in many ways a brilliant book. But it has a fundamental flaw in it, which I believe shows you why my logic trumps his logic, why realism trumps Michael Walzer's just war theory. And that is, he, towards the end of the book, makes the case that in a supreme emergency, when you're on the ropes, when it looks like you're going down the tubes, you can abandon just war theory and act like a realist.
Right, so why has Israel slaughtered thousands of Gazans? Because Israel feels its survival is at stake. Why did the United Kingdom, the United States, kill hundreds of thousands of civilians during World War II? Because these countries felt that their survival or their preeminence was at stake. When individuals, communities, and nations feel their survival is at stake, right, they will do virtually anything to survive. And so it's a very dangerous thing to back individuals, communities, and nations into a corner.
That's the Walzer argument, right? And he's fully aware that this is a very dangerous argument for him to make. And I'll make it clear to you in a second why it's a very dangerous argument for him to make, because he's leaving a narrow crack in the door open. And you cannot leave a narrow crack in the door open with somebody like me, because I'll go through that. I'll go through that door very quickly, right? So what Walzer is saying, you have to be in really dire straits. You have to be on the verge of being finished off, right? And the threat has to be really of the most serious nature. And then at the last moment, you can turn yourself into a realist and deal with the problem. The problem in Walzer's argument is who in their right mind would wait to the last minute? If you're up against a mortal foe, or if you're not up against a mortal foe, you just think you might be up against a mortal foe. You've all read Sebastian's work on intentions, right? Sebastian Rosado will tell you intentions are very hard to divine with a high degree of certainty, to use his rhetoric. How can I be sure what Mike's intentions will be in 20 or 30 years? I can't know. Do I want to wait?
Right. That's why on an individual basis, it's a very dangerous thing to confide in people, right? A general useful framework as you go through life is that, generally speaking, you don't want to confide in people anything that you would not want to hear them then gossip about or have your community then gossip about. If you have a disease, all right, and you share that unnecessarily at work, right, you should only do that if you feel at ease, comfortable, and unthreatened by people then gossiping about your disease. On the other hand, a life where you don't confide in anyone is a fairly barren life. But when you fall in love, or particularly you do intimate things with someone, right? You do intimate things, you develop intimate feelings, you start confiding, and then, you know, most of these intimate relationships end, frequently blow up, and the things that you've confided then get used against you. And so we never know not only how other people will act, we never know how we will act, right? Because we will behave differently in different situations, and we will experience things that completely transform us. And so I remember once I had a girlfriend confide something in me, and I said, oh, I must never use this against her. And I tried to hold it back. And then when things got dicey enough in my relationship with this woman, I started using these very intimate things that she disclosed to me against her.
Until he turns into Godzilla? No. Do I want to deal with him now when he's not Godzilla? And maybe when he's a bit weaker than me, right? So you see the problem that Walzer has. Once you say, once you have a chapter that deals with the subject of supreme emergency, and you say that in a supreme emergency, you can throw just war theory down the toilet and you can act like a realist, you leave yourself open to the argument that it's better to act like a realist early rather than at the last moment, where if you're dealing with a highly efficient adversary, that adversary will finish you off, right? So you see, this is why the conduct of international politics can never be subordinated to a moral or legal order. It just can't happen. Now, I want.
So for people who take religion seriously, all right, we think everything should be subordinated to a religious or a moral worldview. But when it comes to survival, that simply doesn't hold true.
To be very clear here, I'm not saying that there's no room for moral considerations in international politics. My comments may be read to lead in that direction. That's not my argument. I believe that we are all, realists included, moral human beings. I believe that we all have moral compasses, and I believe those moral compasses influence how we think about the world.
And another way of stating this is that we all have a hero system, right? Our greatest fear, according to the book by Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death, is that we are insignificant. And so we latch onto a hero system that imbues meaning to what are otherwise, prosaic choices that we make during the day. And so we all have a hero system, and then we use that hero system to map what is right and wrong, what is significant and insignificant. And having a hero system is essentially a biological necessity for people, right? We have to have some system for granting significance, for believing that our choices have eternal significance, and usually we inherit our hero system from our community.
World. Okay, I just want to make that clear. You understand why I placed all this emphasis on basic realist logic, but I believe at the same time we think about the world, or at least people like Mike and I think about the world in realist terms. We also have, each of us, a moral compass. And the interesting question you want to ask yourself is, how does that realist worldview mesh with that set of moral precepts that guide your thinking about international politics? And my argument is there are three possible scenarios. The first is what the moral compass says you should do and the realist compass says you should do line up. And you have no problem fighting a war, even maybe initiating a war.
And sometimes people don't live by realist principles, and sometimes it's because they just have such a strong commitment to transcendent moral principles. But frequently people are just weak. Frequently, individuals, peoples, tribes, nations simply don't have the strength and commitment to put top priority on their own survival. And so those peoples are doomed to the dustbin of history.
Right, if the moral compass and the realist compass line up. And they actually do quite often in international politics. You can do things for realist reasons that make sense from a moral point of view. Fighting against Adolf Hitler in World War II, I think it was the morally correct thing to do. Trying to contain the Soviet Union during the Cold War, I think it was the morally correct thing to do. I could point to other examples. So the arrows sometimes line up. There are other cases, this is the second scenario, where moral precepts, where realist precepts just don't apply. During the unipolar moment, there's a genocide in Rwanda. You can easily deal with that genocide from a moral perspective because there are no realist considerations involved. It has no effect on the balance of power. It has nothing to do with great power politics. So there are quite a few cases in international politics, certainly during the unipolar moment, but even in a bipolar or multipolar world, where the balance of power is not affected by the use of military force for moral reasons. Then we come to the third possibility, which is the trick. What happens if moral precepts and realist precepts are at odds with each other? What if your moral compass says do this and your realist compass says do the opposite? Regrettably, you'll do what your realist compass says every time. And the reason you will is because of the nature of international politics and the fact that we operate in an anarchic system. We operate in international anarchy where you have no choice. So my argument is that just war theory and international law, although they are both noble enterprises, and in certain circumstances they make good sense, when it comes to questions of war or peace, there's no way that the conduct of international politics can ever be subordinated to them.
Okay, I got up at 4 a.m. this morning and I took 5 milligrams of Adderall. So normally I don't take Adderall on the weekends, but I wanted to do my taxes. So I'd already gathered all necessary documents. I'd already cataloged the amounts of these documents. So it took me about 70 minutes to prepare my taxes for my accountant. And so I'm doing this stream now, 5 hours on from 5 milligrams of Adderall. So normally I take 10 milligrams of Adderall every weekday, usually around 8 a.m. And then I just want to work like straight through for the next 5 to 6 hours, right? When I'm at my cognitive height, I just want to work straight through. Oh, I also had one cup of coffee this morning. So that's what's fueling me. But I forgot to take Adderall on Wednesday. And my God, did I make so many mistakes? The gap between my inclinations and what I ended up saying and doing and emailing was very, very thin. I just blew it again and again and again. I misread situations. I misread things that were assigned to me. And I couldn't be bothered to put the effort in to get the details right. Wednesday was an absolute disaster. Like so much of my life prior to ADHD medication. My God, I noticed the difference of ADHD medication more when I don't take it. I didn't take it yesterday on Shabbos, and I was just felt so scattered. I mean, getting on this medication has just dramatically improved the quality of my work, the quality of my life, the quality of my focus, my ability to put more space between my inclinations and what I end up saying and doing. So one way that I've tried to handle my chaotic impulses, and particularly as I get older and older, I do more of this. I love protocols, right? The more I can have a protocol for something, the more I can keep under control, my wild, anarchic, animal side. So for example, if I don't want to leave the house without taking something with me, all right, I need to put that by my keys. So everything that I'm going to leave the house with, I need to put them all together, right? That maximizes my chances of not forgetting something. Put reminders. I need to put, as many reminders onto my phone as possible, onto my calendar as possible. And when I'm dealing with different situations, I need to develop protocols for how I react. So when I get up in the morning, I get up and I have a cold shower. If I didn't make that part of my protocol, right, if I had to struggle about whether or not to take a cold shower, I wouldn't take normally, as many cold showers. I'd take the easy way out. My natural inclination is to do the easy thing, the lustful thing. I just want to travel the path of excess on the road to the destination of wisdom, but not exactly a winning formula for life. Look, why do I not normally take Adderall on weekends? If I had a guaranteed supply, all right, I'd take Adderall on weekends as well, because it dramatically enhances the quality of my life, the quality of my decisions, the quality of my speech, all right, the quality of my social interactions, the quality of my relationship with myself. But I am so afraid of not having Adderall when it's an economic necessity for me that I be on Adderall, that I usually don't take it on the weekend so that I can, develop a reserve so that I know that it's there for me when it's an absolute economic necessity, that I pay attention to details, that I think through everything that I'm going to say and do. So I'm trying to develop a supply, because I lost half of my first month's supply of Adderall, either through my own carelessness or it was stolen. But yeah, Adderall helps. ADHD medication helps. If you got ADHD, right, most people absolutely need to be on top-line stimulant medication, according to the ADHD experts that I've read and listened to. And all the other workarounds for dealing with ADHD are simply not going to get it done. And so I see people who are chronic slippers, with sex addiction, dating addiction, food addiction, with under-earning addiction. And I just suspect, I'm not a clinician, I just suspect that until they deal with their ADHD by getting on top-line medication, all right, they are not going to make significant progress in overcoming your addictions, right? So 12-step programs are fantastic for developing a community and for developing spiritual solutions to spiritual problems, but spiritual solutions frequently will not deal adequately with physiological problems, just as physiological solutions will frequently not be adequate to spiritual solutions. But yeah, the older I get, the more protocols I want, the more habits that I want to develop, so that when this happens, I react in this way. So there's A, the stimulus, and then B, I've trained myself to react in a certain way, because if I just go along with my own basic impulses, it gets me into a great deal of trouble. I like Michael Wolff. He's a writer, mainly a magazine writer on the media, and then he's had a great deal of success writing books. So I like his various books on Fox News and on Donald Trump. Here he is talking to Charlie Rose.
For the things that make his audience respond.
He's always trying. It's almost like a comedy club in which he's trying out new lines all the time.
Exactly, and he finds those, and then he keeps coming back to them. So he's a consummate performer. I mean, that's what he does. That's what he does all of the time. The Trump campaign, points out that, with almost no preparation, a day's notice, he can summon a live audience of 20, 30, 40,000 people. A Democrat would be, or any other politician, would be hard-pressed to summon 500 people. And for the very simple reason, and you can understand this, they're boring, he is not.
His track record since 2016 as a politician has not been good.
I would sort of separate that out and say that because he's not a politician.
So one thing I love about Michael Wolff is that he is about as agnostic on hero systems as the major writers can get. So he doesn't tend to impose a moral hero system on the characters he talks about.
Not leading a political party. I mean, he's not.
He owns a political party.
He owns it, but that's subservient to him. He doesn't see himself as part of a political party, a political machine, a political enterprise. He sees only himself. So
I love cold showers, but I want to be honest. There isn't strong evidence that they produce fantastic or good or solid or reparative physiological results. So it may be, the dopamine effect that I attribute to cold showers, may be there more in my head than is really there, right? I'm not going to claim there's strong academic evidence for numerous and deep benefits from, immersing yourself in cold water. And certainly if you do it irresponsibly, like Wim Hof, and the Wim Hof method has encouraged and many people have died from, that's an absolute disaster. So if it's something's recommended by Andrew Huberman, right, at Stanford University, or Wim Hof, I'd be highly, highly skeptical.
And the others, he regards they lose because they're politicians. They're not as good as he is in the end.
Real step down in quality on the Charlie Rose show, right? Ever since his big sex scandal and he's gone out on his own, the tech quality of his shows has gone down.
As for whether he loses, well, we don't really know that. I mean, what we know is that he won once. On the second time, he came within 44,000 votes of winning.
Wait a minute. Do you think there's any doubt as to whether Joe Biden won the election or not?
No. I mean, he very clearly, Joe Biden clearly won the election and got many, many more votes. But Trump almost won.
Okay, comment in the chat. Cold showers can be invigorating and reduce the libido. Two other tricks that I found reducing the libido. So, I mean, I try to stay busy during the day so I don't spend a lot of time in erotic daydreams. Then I try to keep, audiobooks running all night to reduce my susceptibility to erotic night dreams. But, getting up and relieving your bladder is a great way, I find, to reduce, the overwhelming power of lust. And also sometimes I just get up and watch a sitcom. So I'm now, I think, on the 10th or 11th season of the sitcom Frasier. So instead of lying in bed in a state of erotic euphoria, recalling past triumphs. I find it much healthier decision for me to get up and watch some Frasier.
That's the kind of remarkable thing, to be Donald Trump, to be that kind of polarizing figure, and then to come within 44,000 votes of winning an electoral college victory.
How do you explain that?
I can't explain that. No, nobody can explain that, except that he has managed to unite this part of the country. So you have to sort of go with, there are two countries, and one is absolutely loyal to Donald Trump. And it is a country that is geographically, exists geographically in a way to give them a decided electoral college advantage so that he can become president. It is possible. We know it's possible because it's already happened. It almost happened a second time, and it may happen a third time because of this remarkable loyalty that he is able to command. And again, to see this in political terms, he doesn't win election, his supporters don't win, all of these things is probably not the best way to look at this. It's probably going to give you a false sense of security. And it's certainly virtually all Republican politicians understand that, because they've realized if they want a career in Republican politics, they have to be Trumpers, even though virtually all of them think of him in highly negative terms. They don't like him. I mean, just simply that they don't like him because he is, he's not somebody it's enjoyable to be with or to work with.
Yet recently, David Brooks, writing in the New York Times, a columnist, Bret Stephens, writing in the New York Times, a columnist, bemoaned where he has taken the Republican Party. It's not the Republican Party they believe in. It's not the Republican Party that they, and it's not the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, well, that Republican Party doesn't exist anymore. So those guys don't have a party. The party has just gone on without them. This has happened sometimes in history. And this is one of those times. The party has a mind of its own.
It is now simply the party of Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
With no programs and no policies, for the most part, just a personality.
There it is in a nutshell.
That's true.
That's absolutely true. And instead of, the problem with many people in the media, the problem with many political reporters is seeing that and saying enumerating all the reasons this is appalling in so many ways, but yet being unable to understand that something transformational has happened here. What is that? Something clearly, a very large number of people in the country want something out of their political leaders that has not been offered them before. And Donald Trump is getting closer to what that is than.
Well, the TV comedy writer Rob Long made this terrific point 20 years ago, that elections for president are in part about who do we want to be the leading character in our national reality show. And in 2016, people chose Donald Trump. 2020, people were tired of Donald Trump. But in 2024, people may want to ride the Trump train once again, to be the lead character in the national reality TV show.
Many.
He's making them believe he understands, at least at a minimum. But what is it?
Well, as I say, I think he gains those skills from being on reality television. That's a hell of a formative experience for dealing with the American public. But there's it's an interesting thing to go to Trump rallies, and and the media, the New York Times, always paints those rallies as kind of dark, threatening, something. There's something aberrant about them and warped. The curious thing is when you're there among 20,000 people, and even at that moment when Trump goes into his standard, what his campaign called the grievance section of his speeches, telling people your lives are terrible, you have nothing, you'll get nothing, they want to take everything from you. Even at that
they're conspiring against you.
All of that. Even at that point, what you sense when you're there is that everybody is having a great time. It's like a country fair. It's like a rock and roll concert. You know, they're there.
I think that's a key point. People often choose religion. People choose a type of politics. People choose, you know, art. People choose friends, community, hobbies, largely on the basis of how does it make them feel. And I think Tucker Carlson viewers, you know, Tucker Carlson fans love Tucker Carlson because of how he makes them feel. Right? Donald Trump fans, you know, love Donald Trump because of how he makes them feel. You know, people want to feel alive. People want to feel significant, and people want to feel a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's what Donald Trump provides for 50 million of our fellow Americans. Okay, a journalist asked, New York Times here, how do you define Latino? And I just want to use this briefly to illuminate a larger point. So New York Times says, as the presidential election approaches, Latino Land by Marie Arana explores the diverse politics and historical roots of Hispanic Americans. Well, Hispanic doesn't really have much meaning, all right? Mexican Americans don't have much in common with Cuban Americans, right? Hispanic doesn't really mean much, just like white doesn't really mean much to most people in the first world, right? Most Americans do not identify primarily as white. They identify as American. Right? Most Australians don't identify primarily as white. They identify by their nation. They identify as nationalist Australians, right? The English identify primarily as English, the French as French, the Germans as German, the Norwegians as Norwegian, all right? Nationalism is the most powerful force in politics. And we live in an age of nationalism. We've lived in an age of nationalism since the 18th century. And nationalism is far more important than civilizations. All right. Hispanic civilization, white civilization has virtually no meaning. Right. Very few people primarily identify as Hispanic. Right. They identify instead as Mexican, Nicaraguan, Guatemalan, Cuban, Brazilian, Argentinian. Right. They don't feel a great deal in common with other, you know, Hispanics, just like most people who are white don't feel a great deal in common with other whites. They feel something in common with other Americans, with other Australians. So we don't live in a time of civilizational battles, right? The late political scientist Samuel Huntington wrote a book about the war of civilizations. But civilizations, by and large, don't go to war. Civilizations, by and large, don't shape us, drive us, animate us, push, you know, the news forward, right? What pushes the news forward is overwhelmingly nationalism, not civilization, be it white civilization, Hispanic civilization. And another shocking development here in the news from the New York Times. Murder trial lays bare a hip-hop pioneer's double life. I hope you're sitting down. In the years before his death, the Run DMC DJ Jam Master Jay secretly turned to the drug trade to keep providing financial support to relatives and friends. Who would have thought that this great musician would have turned to the drug trade, and then to have the life of this musical genius, you know, ended way too soon by murder. I never would have expected that to happen to one of the great, you know, rap DJs of our time. You're wondering what the heck's going on with Jordan Peterson? What's going on with Decoding the Gurus? Well, let me tell you.
He's just picked it up from anti-vax, Twitter, and whatever.
It's like a culture war thing, right? It's like a media kerfuffle that if I was in his shoes and I was totally focused on what generates more attention and more drama, etc., how can I project myself into the role of a little bit like Bret there, David fighting Goliath, then, you know, this is a nice little opportunity.
He's never one to turn down the chance to crusade. So this is Jordan jumping on a new crusade. And whether you're a fan or a critic, this is something that he does. He goes on tirades and these kind of crusades, which he regards as being because he's a very principled person. And, you know, if he won't stand up for things, bloody hell, who will, Matt? So you mentioned that, you know, it's not really a huge threat for him to have his license removed. And he does make that point.
You know, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm not wrong about the damn tweets. You know, I might be wrong about how this is going to unfold, but even there, the worst thing they can do to me is take my license. Now, they're definitely planning to do that because the rule is I have to be educated by people of their choice at my expense for whatever length of time they deem suitable until, by their standards, I've learned whatever the hell lesson I'm supposed to learn. And I can't even imagine what that lesson would be. It's like, what? Don't tweet? Don't speak? Don't think? Don't tell my clients the truth? So I don't know how to learn that lesson. I don't know how they're going to measure whether or not I've learned it. I don't know who they're going to get to measure it. I have no idea who they're going to get to teach me. I guess we're going to find out. I would like to find out. I'm very curious about that person. And so I'm set up for failure. And, you know, my detractors will say, well, Dr. Peterson, you set yourself up for failure. You know, whatever. But I don't think I've set myself up for failure. I wouldn't say the evidence so far suggests that I have.
There's quite a lot there. The bit at the start where he mentions that the worst thing is them possibly taking his license and how that's not really bad anyway. And then they're going to put him on this training course and who knows when that can end or what it will entail. And like, then he lets his imagination run wild where it's like, what are they going to say? Like, don't speak, don't say anything, don't talk. And like, no, Jordan, they're going to tell you to stop tweeting like a demented Muppet. They're going to tell you if you want to be, you know, a licensed psychologist, you can't just be running rampant, unleashing your id all over.
Right. If you want the benefits that come with being a licensed psychologist, then there's a price to pay. All right. You can't just say anything you want online. I could not join the major Society of Alexander Technique Teachers, the American Society of Alexander Technique Teachers. Not only could I not join it because of the outlandish things I've said online, but an Alexander Technique teacher who wants to maintain his good status with the American Society of Alexander Technique Teachers could not employ me. All right. They could not really publicly associate with me because I am not willing to confine what I say to what's in the best interest of the profession. So there are many benefits to being part of a profession, but it comes with a price. Right? You cannot speak, you cannot conduct yourself in a way that's against the best interests of your profession. Now, the best interests of your profession are generally those that will enhance the status, the prestige, the income of members of your profession. So there are going to be a lot of restrictions that come with speech. For example, I could not publicly criticize other Alexander Technique teachers if I wanted to be a good member of the American Society of Alexander Technique Teachers. So I've never tried to join any of the professional Alexander Technique societies, and I've lost clients because of that. I've had clients, and then they said, "Oh, are you a member of a professional society of Alexander Technique Teachers?" And I've said no. And so, if you want to be a licensed clinical psychologist, there is a significant price to pay. You cannot just tweet like a demented madman, to use the words here of cultural anthropologist Chris Kavanaugh. So I am a part of the Orthodox Jewish community, right? There are restrictions in my freedom that come with that, right? If you want to be married, if you want to maintain community, friends, be part of any sort of professional organization, right, you're going to have to accept a considerable reduction in freedom, or you can choose, as I often have, to forego certain professional organizational memberships to maximize my freedom of expression.
The internet. That's what they're going to tell you. It's a very straightforward, like it would be an absolutely bog standard thing, but he seems to genuinely work himself up into this tizzy that he's going to be like, Clockwork Orange, have his eyes taped open for, who knows, 5 years, Matt, in a fucking Canadian, Siberian style prison.
Like a re-education camp.
Yeah,
because he does tweet madly. Regardless of what you think of Jordan Peterson, he does tweet in a pretty demented way. And, I can understand that even a board that probably doesn't want anything to do with this, there are very strong free speech protections in North America, and like you said, it would be some sort of just by the numbers little thing. Look, please don't call someone a raging fat hag or something like that.
So my father was a leading theologian in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he gave a controversial speech as part of the Seventh-day Adventist Forum program, and so forums were supposed to be a free speech opportunity within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But if you're going to be employed by any church, or any organization, right? You cannot say things publicly that are going to damage or divide that organization. All right, the First Amendment does not protect you from your organization, your employer, your church, right, taking disciplinary action. And my father and supporters of my father, have been arguing tendentiously this point for over 40 years that, hey, he said this in what's supposed to be a protected space where you're supposed to have protected, freedom of expression to explore controversial ideas. But the world simply doesn't work that way. And I took that attitude for many years, for 9 years after the Glacier View controversy in 1980 that saw my father have his Seventh-day Adventist ministerial credentials removed from him. And then when I complained about it to the late Robert Louis Stevenson, a professor of musicology at UCLA, he made the point that every group has rules, right? Religions have rules, churches have rules, stamp clubs have rules. You violate the rules, then you're going to lose the benefits that come with that sort of group membership.
That isn't appropriate for a thing. And then he does that little voice, which is...
Oh, yeah, that was...
He was imagining some hypothetical critic.
Detractor.
Yeah, detractor. Yeah. But the words that he was putting into the detractor's voice there was not something that ever occurred to me. That's just stuff that would occur to Jordan, right?
Well, no, the one about, you've set yourself up for failure, right? Like, I mean... He is doing that. I would say that. I mean, I probably wouldn't use that tone of voice, but like he's setting it up so that he cannot do the training course. He could have just went, because he's like, who knows how long it could be. I can tell him it could probably be a maximum like 8 weeks or, a couple of months. Training courses don't tend to last indefinitely when they're a kind of punishment thing, right? So yeah, it would be a set amount of time and it would be extremely boring probably, but so by him setting it up that it's this big thing and that he's going to rage against it and that he's going to fight it at every step of the way, he is essentially making it so it's almost impossible for him to comply with some bog standard training course, because he's going to make it into a huge deal, no matter what it is.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's clearly like a rehash of the original thing that helped propel him to fame, where he took his principled stand against, what was it?
C-16.
C-16.
Bill C-16.
Yeah, and whether he's right or wrong, like whatever you think of that issue, he was definitely beating it up in order to make it a drama with him at the center of it. This seems to be now his modus operandi.
Yes, let's hear him go on a little bit more about potential consequences that could happen from losing his license.
Now, what's the consequence of me losing my license? Well, it's annoying, because those are hard licenses to get, and I worked very hard to earn and deserve that license and to maintain it. And also very hard at being a good therapist, which I was. There were no complaints taken against me by anyone until I became known in the public sphere, so that's a good thing to consider. And I'm not that happy about the prospect of the woke Beatles that you described having their way with my professional credentials. It annoys me deeply. Now, on the other hand, I'm not dependent on that license anymore. I have other tricks up my sleeve, so to speak, anyways. And at some point, I'm going to determine that being a member of their pathetic little incestuous, ideologically addled, resentment-ridden, bureaucratic, pea-brained, micro-souled club is not worth the effort. And I suppose we're probably there already, but I have something to do publicly, in my delusion.
So I guess he's acknowledging that he's probably going to lose this fight against Goliath, but he doesn't care. He says tricks up his sleeve. What he means is very large, significant sources of income, such that it really doesn't matter very much whether he practices or not.
Yeah, though it does strike me as something of an internal battle that you can hear like bits of it flashing up there, because at the start, he's like, one of these things that Jordan likes to do is pose himself hypothetical questions and then answer them himself, right? And he's like, so what are the consequences? well, it's annoying, you know. And then he's saying, and these licenses are hard, and I worked hard to get it, and I was a good therapist, and blah, 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 and that annoys me. Then, though, he kind of shifts to, and then anyway, I've got other tricks. And do I want to be a member of your little pathetic, incestuous, ideologically addled, bureaucratic, pea-brained, micro-souled club? Like, this is him into the Jordan Peterson,
That's how I've often reacted to my setbacks. I'll offer a little bit of contrition, a little bit of honesty, and many people will resonate with that. All right, when I've been honest, authentic, realistic, all right, people have resonated with that. But then when I slip into self-justification and vitriol against people who have distanced themselves from me, right, almost everyone has been turned off when I've exhibited these Jordan Peterson-like symptoms in the past.
Polemicist, you know, the pundit character. This would be an example. If you were a professional of some variety and your licensing board was taking disciplinary action against you, and you went on a public broadcast and referred to the members of the board as pathetic, incestuous, ideologically addled, resentment-ridden, bureaucratic, pea-brained, micro-souled individuals, that wouldn't show that you are a particularly responsible member of the community, right?
Yeah, good point there from Decoding the Gurus. That will do it for me. Take care. Maybe I'll see you in another 3 weeks. Bye-bye. Wishing you, what is it, Dr. Fraser Crane always wishes you?